Hey there. Welcome back to your favorite sales podcast. As always, I'm your host, Ross Rich, and today we have a special live episode for you. Over the past few weeks, I've been on the road learning from the best revenue operators around, from Go Nimbly's RevFest in Brooklyn to RevOpsAF in New Orleans. And after jamming with the world's top go-to-market leaders, I noticed one consistent theme. No matter how the function evolves, the force multiplier driving true go-to-market alignment across the famously strong personalities of marketing, sales, and CS is RevOps leadership. That theme especially stood out at RevOpsAF, where I took the 10 out of 10 GTM pod on the road. You'll hear from three brilliant operators, including Jeff at DailyPay, Matt at Consensus, and Tessa at ZoomInfo. For today's episode, we're taking you straight to the floor at RevOpsAF, and let's get into it.
Hey everyone, welcome to the welcome reception at RevOpsAF in New Orleans. We're doing some really cool, quick videos, interviews with some of the RevOps leaders here. We have Matt, the head of RevOps at Consensus. Is it Go Consensus? Consensus?
Go Consensus if you want to look at the website, and Consensus if you're just looking for the name of the company.
We're going to get SEO hits right there. GoConsensus.com.
GoConsensus.com. You
Awesome.
got it.
Awesome.
You should do sales for us. You nailed it.
There we go. Well, we're going to talk about a couple things, mainly the challenging world of RevOps, having to manage a lot of different balls in the air across sales, marketing, CS, enablement, etc. So with that, the first question is, what do RevOps teams most underestimate usually when it comes to driving execution excellence?
I think the biggest thing is when you're looking at RevOps, I always frame it as data, process, systems, and it's in that order.
Data,
Process, systems.
Got it.
And I think what people underestimate is that the system is what's going to win you over. The system is what's going to solve everything.
Got it. So we start at the end, basically.
Exactly. But the system doesn't solve everything. The data
in the system. Like, what's the thing that they think they can start with?
We'll do a controversial one, thinking AI is going to solve everything.
Okay.
Because AI is just a way of taking a look at a large data set and taking insights from it. But if your data set is malformed or not formed correctly, what's it going to tell you? It's just the same thing as having bad deal data. This is the same as having a bad process. So a business can run itself on a good data and process out of a Google sheet and probably made a bunch of people cringe to death, right? But
so they don't need consensus, or I didn't say that, sir.
Hold your horses. But if you think about it, data and process, you can run out of a spreadsheet if you need to.
Yeah.
The only reason you ever migrate to a bigger system is because you're running into the limitation of that system. So I think what people are underestimating is, oh, well, we'll just do the data and process and we'll get a better system. We'll buy the next system. The next system's going to solve it. You want to max out your data and process. You want to nail that as early as possible. And then once you are able to max out that system, then you migrate to the next one.
So maybe an analogy to that is you're starting with hiring 100 AEs and you haven't figured out your ICP.
Exactly.
In your messaging and positioning, but you're starting with the output versus, we should be nailing this core stuff to be able to accelerate it. That's only as good as the...
Yeah, and if you want to take it smaller, like I have 4 kids. We have had 4 kids over the last 6.5 years, but we didn't buy our Toyota Sequoia when we had 1, right? We bought it once we're like, oh, wait, we have 4. We need a 3rd row. We need a larger car. We don't buy a larger car unless you need it. Otherwise, you're just maxing out what you have before it actually makes sense. So exactly, you want to max out the fundamentals first, and then have a system that comes in, and that's going to be easier to implement.
Totally. Yeah, the misconception of we want to start where we want to end up versus maybe understanding where we're at today.
Yep.
And sometimes maybe the most impactful things are the lowest hanging fruit that might seem super simple.
Get the fundamentals right. And the fundamentals are not the system, it's the data and the process.
Awesome. Well, the next big question we have is, how do you think about RevOps' job of aligning all these strong personalities across the different functions you have to manage? Because we went from sales ops, CS ops, to more of a holistic understanding of the customer journey and processes and data, right? Because you can't have a separate data system and process for each of those. Now it's under one umbrella. How do you, though, think about driving those priorities and centralizing all of that under one roof?
Well, it's a good time for RevOps to come into existence, right? Yes. Because sales ops has existed for a while. Marketing ops is somewhat recent, but it's been around for a decade. I feel like CS ops is lagging behind, but all three of those elements are what are going to be necessary for building out what I think is going to be the solution to bad data, bad process, and bad use of systems inside of the revenue funnel.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about priorities, I think the first thing you have to do is you have to disassociate RevOps from the direct VP level. That is, say, don't have your sales ops person report to your VP of sales ops. And here's the reason why.
So where would they be under?
So they should be under a RevOps team that is more or less impartial and, let's say, reporting under, I would argue, the CRM. Because at the end of the day, the chief revenue officer is typically, not always, but typically responsible for marketing, sales, and CS, right? The full revenue funnel. And so if you have a ops person who reports to the VP of sales, the first person that owns their work product is not only someone who has a bias towards the sales component, but also they're not an expert, right? So you're having to convince someone who's not an expert on the data processes systems of a specific silo, but also that's siloed away from how that impacts marketing up funnel and downstream to the client success side. So if you pull that out and you say, we're going to put every single one of our ops people under a RevOps branch that has the CRO as the final say, what you now have is an impartial guide that, number one, can look across all the functions from marketing, sales, and CS, align the data and process and systems so that a decision in sales doesn't negatively impact marketing. Yeah. Instead, it's trying to look holistically over the whole funnel. And number two, it checks the egos of the VPs of marketing and sales, and they have a big ED. It checks their egos because now they can't just say, oh, well, I want it done this way. Instead, they have to back up and say, I got to convince the head of RevOps, who reports to my boss,
that this is the most important.
That this makes sense. And also, it creates a level of trust, because if you have the right RevOps org that says, listen, I'm not doing this to create a stifling process to make everyone miserable. I'm doing this because I can look a couple of steps ahead and say, if you do exactly your prescription, we're going to run into issues when this happens, and we grow to this level of error. Instead, let me figure out how to implement what you want to get done. And I'll show you why this works holistically throughout the funnel. And then once that's done, you buy a lot of trust. And I think that checks their ego, because they say, hey, listen, even though I may have a strong opinion to do something in a particular way, I'm going to trust my RevOps person, because it's not just they have one department.
Broader lens, right? So maybe because of a thing that, I'll help you understand why this impacts the other functions.
I mean, from consensus, I'll give a good example of it. We are an all HubSpot shop. So we have marketing and sales, and we had client success. They were in their own product at the time, and essentially pitched, why don't we bring you into HubSpot? Why don't we bring client success into HubSpot? And of course, there's a lot of apprehension at first, because HubSpot's for sales and it's for marketing. It's not for client success. But at the end of the day, we had built up a really good rapport with the VP of CS, where we said, listen, let me paint you the picture of what this looks like. And let me paint you the picture of why this is going to be more helpful. You get to see all the sales information. You get to see their usage data directly in here, because we're piping it into HubSpot.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they said, you know what? This makes my job easier. And the moment it made their job easier is the moment they were completely on board with it.
That's a great point about, so you get from the theory behind these discussions. So at the end of the day, if it's easier for the people doing the hard job on the front lines of their customers, from the AEs, the implementation specialists, to the CSMs, that's where I feel like you gain a lot of trust. And that's where I've seen it broken, actually, most of the time on RevOps, where it becomes like this systems thing. Here's more work and here's more work, instead of understanding what the workflow should be. How do you think about balancing, again, the theory stuff of like, hey, how should it work across, to like getting to the grassroots of an organization to gain that trust?
So you always have to think first, your customers as a ops person is the end user at the RevOps field, not the VPs.
Yes, the field, not the boss's boss's boss.
Now, if you solve it for the end user, you get good data and process, which means you can roll it up. And now the VP has really good data to base decisions off, right? So if you service the end user and you create an environment where the data and process is going to work for the VP, Yeah, they're all of a sudden going to have the ability to prioritize and figure it out.
It's kind of like a counterintuitive way. Hey, instead of better dashboards, I'm going to get you better data so you can have the same thing but higher quality.
And most importantly is you need to make sure that, let's put it this way, if your data is 80% filled, but that 80% is 100% accurate, doesn't matter.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
20% is missing. How do you make any decision off of it? So anytime you're trying to make this data work for you, automation works really well, or enforcement, because you need to have the data to make the decision. You need to have it be totally and 100% filled. So another principle there to make this work is the minimally necessary number of fields or properties or data sets, right? Don't make 17 different properties. Try and limit it to as much as possible. And this makes it awkward because sometimes you have to say, I get that you want 50 options in that dropdown. But what does that actually tell you?
It almost makes it zero then because
right? You need to make it actionable.
Oh, weird. 95% of them are the first option. Hey,
or it's other.
or it's
98% is other.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, great. Everything's other. What does that tell them, right? You're right back to square one.
Yeah.
So make it actionable, make it understandable, and also just make it simple. Like you got to make the stuff simple and easier to digest. And I think far too often people complicate what you need to do. They complicate the data, complicate the process. If you're going to make it actionable and workable for the end user, it needs to be simple. And most importantly, it needs to make their life easier.
Yeah. And this is the easy stuff to forget when you're having those conversations with the other VPs, like we're saying, where we spend a lot of our time. So like it's great for sales leaders to spend the time with their customer, if they're the CR or VP, the same thing with RevOps leaders. I find the best ones that their teams love, that the executives love, actually understand the ground floor the best. So
you gotta be at the ground floor, understand what's working and what's not.
Yeah.
And hopefully you build that trust and rapport so that the end user, hopefully not every moment of your life, but comes to you and says, this isn't working.
Yeah.
This isn't working. And then you can be like, why? Show me why. And most importantly, don't let the end user overprescribe the solution. Tell me the problem.
Yeah.
Show me the problem. Let me figure it out. Trust that I will figure out the best way to solve this.
Totally. I love it. Well, before we wrap, the last one, a lighter question. What's your favorite or least favorite buzzword of 2025 so far?
I think I've already talked about it a little bit, but I think AI. AI is the solve for everything, right? AI has some really cool features. Like, I'll give a shout out to Gong. I think what they do with AI and reading and interpreting the data you get from call transcripts and querying it, looking at deal data, amazing. It takes the ability of a 40-minute call that you just listen to and boom, you can ask it a question. But an AI doesn't solve the problem of, I need to predict what the close rate probability is.
What do you do with that?
Instead, AI is not the silver bullet for everything. AI has very specific purposes and uses. And also, it's not going to work if you don't have your data and process in a good place. It just isn't. It's just another system, right? It's just another system.
Full circle here with that last first question. But this was awesome, Matt. Thank you for spending some time with us. And I hope you enjoy the conference.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
We got Jeff, the Senior Director of RevOps at DailyPay. And I just found out that he's also from Ontario. So we're just talking Leafs. We're going to talk that as well as maybe some RevOps stuff.
Small road. We're going to start with the Leafs or we'll do RevOps first?
Man, I don't know how I feel about the Leafs right now. We'll get into that in a second. We will close out with that. But to start, maybe with a more challenging question. What do you think the most underestimated thing is when it comes to RevOps to drive execution excellence? What do people miss? What do people skip over when they think about how to drive a real change across the field?
That's a really good question. I think it's probably cross-functional readiness. So deals don't just die when executing in the sales process with the sales team. There's legal, there's credit, there's security. There's a lot of opportunity for things to go wrong. And if you don't account for that and try to move that forward in your process, it's hard to get a repeatable, scalable sales process.
So kind of going back to, what is it called? Time kills all deals. How do we accelerate all those kind of internal pieces?
Exactly. And making sure that you have strong entry, exit criteria and expectations for each of your stages in the sales process is critical.
Yeah.
And making sure any opportunity that you can loop those internal processes in earlier in the deal cycle will just help it escalate and accelerate the velocity you'll do.
And how do you do that? Say you join a company, things are all over the place. We're super slow to get to those internal teams. We don't even have entry and exit criteria as a theory. How do you drive that rigor and kind of operationalize those best practices outside of just fields and stages, but actually drive that change with your sales leadership team and A's on the field?
Yeah, it's another good question. So every business is different, but it probably comes down to the type of sales process. If you have different segments, depending on the company size that you're selling to.
Yeah.
But data is always the easiest way to get things going when you want other cross-functional, non-commercial functions to buy in and get involved in the process and want to change the way they do things.
So what kind of data? Like win rates tied to if we engage legal at this point, or what kind of?
Yeah, or it's like, if we have a stage where it's very common where in the sales process, there will be a legal stage, legal review, contract negotiation. So our deals go in and just sitting in that stage and just dying. When we have you look at the totality of a sales cycle, which stage are we spending the most time and what are the steps that take place in each of those stages?
Yeah.
If you're selling to a strategic logo, that could be very different than a small SME logo. So, obviously the larger the logo, the more red tape, the more steps there are, more back and forth with red lines. With legal, for instance, is there just back and forth that we could cut out that we always are going to end up approving anyways.
True.
So, yeah, it depends on, where the data drives you.
Totally. Well, maybe to challenge you a bit on that one, because what I found a lot of times is, speaking of entry and exit criteria, there's typically for a lot of companies that don't have that dialed, it's, we lose a lot of deals in negotiation, so we do a bunch of negotiation training. But was that really the reason we're losing these deals, or did we miss something along the way? Do we not do proper discovery so that we're not pitching value? Do we not get to the right stakeholders during maybe a POC? So it just ends up dying there, but we didn't do the right stuff. How do you think about maybe the signals? Data might be saying, hey, we're doing a really bad job of negotiation in stage 5, but the real problem is, early stage disco or during the POC process.
That's a great call. So I think it's a balancing of two different things, and it could be both. But what I would say you're referring to more is around pipeline health quality issues, which goes back to discovery. So if you don't have a high level of entry or criteria for qualification in the discovery process, you're just going to have an inflated pipeline, and then it's really hard to uncover what's going wrong with the sales process.
Exactly, yeah.
That's where, methodologies, whether you use Sandler and MedPick, a combination of the both, BANT, whatever it is, making sure that you're capturing all the required information, you're using tools, whatever conversation intelligence tool that you use to make sure that you get scorecards. You got to check the box on the quality front before you understand what's going wrong with the actual qualified pipeline that you're moving through the process.
Yeah, that's what we call. A lot of times the issue starts at the very beginning, and that is
very common.
Yeah. Well, second question, when you think about being a RevOps leader, right, you oversee, it's a very broad scope, especially moving from the old world of just sales ops or CS ops or marketing ops to kind of the whole revenue function. How do you think about balancing your resources and priorities with the strong personalities of leadership across those customer-facing teams?
Yeah, so it's kind of indirectly talking about how we tie all those functions together.
And how you decide, hey, what's the thing that's getting done? Maybe sales cares more about this, but it's a big marketing challenge, or hey, we really got to focus on post-sales, so sorry, sales and marketing, you're not going to get what you want now. How do you think about managing all
so
those stakeholders?
It goes into prioritization, obviously, but to take a step back, we're in the process of implementing or operationalizing the bow tie model. So
the winning by design,
winning by design, famous bow tie model. But obviously, when you zoom out, there's, you don't fit all the stages or all the steps in the process within that bow tie. But when you double click in, we could actually probably have 72 different touches from the time it's a marketing qualified lead all the way through to when we're upselling and renewal. So understanding exactly what's going on in each of those different steps, where we're falling short, where there's area for improvement, and then just once again, using the data to drive where we're spending our time, prioritizing things, getting leadership involved. And a big part of that is making sure that RevOps has a seat at the table to make sure that we can talk through, hey, this is what we think the impact is of this problem at the beginning of the funnel. This might be more important down here, post-booking, and just really aligning as a group collectively as leaderships and a leadership team, being able to zoom out and see the big picture.
Totally. And with that, this question that comes up all the time these days is who owns that customer journey, right? Obviously around a table and there's sales and RevOps and enablement, all these folks. Is there one true owner? Is it just, hey, it needs to be this collaboration? Because what I always think, right, is what's a terrible expression of a dog has, two people feeding it, it starves. It sometimes feels like if everyone kind of owns that, it never gets done. So curious to get your take on who should really be driving that customer journey alignment, that whole bow tie.
So you nailed it with the word alignment. So a lot of people confuse revenue operations with more of a supporting function of all of these different buckets within marketing, sales, CS. And RevOps is more so about aligning all of those and bringing them together. So for the cooks in the kitchen, making sure that they're all talking to one another, align goals, align measurements. We're all marching towards the same drum or beat. But from an ownership perspective of alignment, I do think that falls on revenue teams.
Yes. Relying on those teams. Yeah. It's a tough job.
It is. It isn't easy.
Well, before the last question, it's an easy one. How do you, as a RevOps team, gain the trust of the field? Because a lot of times, myself being an ex-seller and sales manager, sometimes I felt like there was all this friction that they would introduce. As we scaled and we had more systems and processes, even harder to close deals. Whereas I feel like the goal really is to reverse that and make it easier. How do you really understand what's happening on the front lines and gain the trust and understanding to make sure that that impact, truly is seen, not just in the boardroom and talking to the VP of sales and marketing, but actually with the frontline sellers?
Yeah, that's critical for success because, if the field doesn't think that we're doing a good job, the board, executive leadership could be thinking we're great and we're saying the right things.
Exactly,
if they're not buying in, a lot of the stuff that we actually want to execute on won't end up coming to fruition. So I think it's twofold. So we do a lot of voice of the field surveys, so especially with sales. So how do you feel about the quality of our data? How do you feel about, our usage of AI? How do you feel about our tech stack?
Yeah.
Because, even I'm guilty. I'll come to something like this and I'll see a lot of shiny new tools and I'll be like, oh, this is great. I think this is going to solve X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
But in reality, sometimes I'm probably just adding another piece to the tech stack that's going to make their life harder, not automate anything.
Yeah.
Now I'm driving them from living in 2 tools to 6, next thing you know. So making sure that we have a good pulse on what the field feels is super critical. And usually when we think about our priorities, if we can take 2 or 3 takeaways from that voice of the field and say, hey, our data isn't good as an example, not that that's a problem, but why would they say that? And double click into it, spend some time with some individuals, both top level performers and middle of the pack and bottom, and really try to understand where they're coming from when they make a comment like that is pretty loaded. And it could come or boil down to just, hey, we have too many fields. So I need less. Or I just need to know what I go to for this and that, and I need some documentation. So it actually might not even be an issue.
Totally.
It's really just
and have a tool for that. You weren't aware of it or we didn't build it into the workflow or something.
It's really meeting the field where they are and making sure they feel supported.
Awesome. Well, before we wrap, a question I've been asking everyone for 2025, what is your favorite or least favorite buzzword when it comes to RevOps?
Okay. You want a bowl? Favorite, least favorite?
Yeah, whatever stands out to you.
So favorite, to go with the bow tie, full funnel visibility.
Okay.
Least favorite, I'm going to go say source of truth for data because that just, it's very hard to achieve, but everybody wants it.
Source of truth. Yeah.
Source of truth.
Awesome, man. Well, this is fun.
Sounds good. It was great. Thanks.
We got a special guest
Jeff,
here. We
the
have
Senior Director of
Tessa,
RevOps at
the
DailyPay.
VP of RevOps
And
at
I just found out
ZoomInfo.
that he's
And
also
we're gonna
from
be talking
Ontario,
to her
so we're
about
just
all
talking
things
things
RevOps.
I love RevOps.
So yeah, we're going to talk that as well as maybe some RevOps
me,
stuff.
Ross. Excited to
We're
be
going to start with the
here.
Leafs, or we'll do
Excited that
RevOps
Accord
first.
sponsored the welcome reception.
Man, I don't
Good
know how I
job.
feel
There
about
was
the
some
Leafs right
Accord
now. We'll
cookies.
get into that.
I had a bite. They were actually good.
I actually
that
baked
would
all
at
of
the
those.
start.
I got in last night early.
Maybe the more challenging
And the
question.
team, all my account executives and
what do you
marketing
think
got
the most
together and baked all those
underestimated
cookies.
thing is when
Yeah,
it
it
comes
makes
to
sense
RevOps?
to me. I mean,
to
really
drive
is a
execution
CEO.
excellence. What do
Time
people
ROI.
miss? What do people skip
Nice.
over when they
Well,
think about how to drive a real change?
Well, the
across
first
the field?
question is going to
That's
be
a really good
about
question.
Rob,
I think it's
yes.
probably
I don't get interviewed.
cross-functional readiness.
What do you
So
hear? It's
deals
your
don't
night.
just
Let's
die
talk
when
about it. This
executing
wasn't
in the sales
planned.
process with the sales team. There's
Tell me,
legal,
why,
there's credit,
Roth, are
there's
you
security.
passionate about
There's
RevOps?
a lot of
Why is your
opportunity for
company
things to
here?
go wrong, and if you don't
Why are
account
you
for that and
talking
try
to
to
us
move that
about
forward in your
RevOps?
process,
And
it's hard to get a repeatable,
what does
scalable
the
sales
board have to
process.
do
So
with
kind of
it?
going back
That's
to
it. Interesting
what
question.
is it called?
Actually, when I
Time
started
kills all
Accord,
deals. How do we
I honestly
accelerate
didn't
all
know a
those
lot
kind of
about
internal
RevOps or
pieces
enablement
or kind of the in between?
Exactly. Making sure that you have strong
make it
entry,
happen
exit
across those. I was
criteria
an
and
ex-seller and
expectations
sales
for each of
leader.
your stages in the
Sales.
sales
And
process is
I wouldn't
critical.
do
Yeah.
And
as a
making sure any
seller,
opportunity
sales,
that
I
you
wouldn't do
can loop
anything that
those
had anything to
internal
do with tools or
processes in
systems
earlier in the
until
deal
we
cycle
couldn't
would
close
just
a
help
deal on my
escalate
team
and,
until you put up that gate or
accelerate
field that
the
you had.
velocity of
And
doing
I
it.
didn't
And how do you do
understand
that?
the
Say you join a
importance
company.
all the
things are all
behind
over
the
the place.
scenes
We're
work
super slow to get to
that
those
went
internal
into
teams.
dialing
We
a
don't even have
productive,
entry next
highly
criteria as a
efficient,
theory
repeatable sales team.
How do you
So
drive
when we
that
started
rigor and
selling
kind of
core, we started selling to
operationalize
sales
those
leaders,
best
we started selling to
practices
reps.
outside of just
we didn't
field
understand
stages,
that
but actually
the
drive
true
that
decision
change,
makers, the
with
people
your
with the
sales
power
leadership team
at
and
companies
AEs on the field.
Yeah, it's
are
another great
the
question.
VPs of RevOps.
Every
They are
business
the
is
people
different,
that
but
the
it probably comes
CRO,
down to the type
the
of sales
deal slinging
process of your
CRO
different
goes
segments,
up
depending
to
on the
and
company
says,
size that
how
you're
do I
selling
make
to.
this work?
But
They
data is
understand
always
what to say to
the easiest
customers.
way
They
to get
understand
things
how to,
going when you want
a
other
customer journey
cross-functional,
from a very visceral, like
non-commercial
hands-on tactical
functions to buy
perspective. They
in,
don't understand how to build
and
systems
get
around
involved
it.
in the process.
So when I started
and want to
scaling
change
out
the way they do
our own
things.
company,
What kind
around,
of data?
like
Ford and how to
win
drive
rates
better
tied to if we
customer
engage
journey at this
journeys
point,
and
or what
actually
kind
adopt
of
and implement.
It's like,
value selling, all that
if
good stuff. We
we
realized
have
that
a
we needed a
stage where
partner. That
it's
was
very
RevOps.
common where
So
in
that's
the
what
sales
got me
process
excited
there'll
about
be a
RevOps. That's
legal
why we're sponsoring
stage,
here. We want
legal
to get close
review,
to that
contract
community because
negotiation.
they call the
So our
shots and they
deals
actually
going
make
and
all the
just
stuff
sitting in
happen
that
behind
stage and
the
just
scenes.
dying.
So basically, all
when
I
we have
heard
a
is that
if you
RevOps
look at
is
the
the
totality
best
of a sales
job
cycle,
RevOps is the boss.
which stage
RevOps
are we
is the
spending the
boss.
most time?
And everyone needs to
and
get
what
in
are the steps
line.
that take
I love
place in
it.
each of those
We are in
stages?
control.
If you're
I
selling
love
to a
it.
strategic
So is there anything
logo, that could be
coming out
very
of this
different than a small
conference that
SME
you're
logo.
hoping to
So,
get or take away?
you know, obviously the larger the
I
logo, the more
always
red
love
tape, the more steps
going
there
to
are,
conferences
more
myself,
back
not
and
just
forth of
setting a
red
marketing and
lines.
sales team, because I think it's just
With
a
legal, for
fast way
instance,
to
is there
get a pulse on the market.
you know,
Every
back and forth
quarter
that we
things are
could cut out that we always are
changing
going to end
so
up
quickly,
approving
right?
anyway.
Yes.
You can talk
True.
about,
So,
all the
it
agentic
depends
AI
on,
stuff. We can talk
you know, where the
about,
day drives you.
the
Totally.
economic
Headwinds
maybe that
around,
challenge you a bit on that
sell
one
the-
because
you
what
know,
I found a lot of
federally,
times is
sponsored
speaking of
companies
entry and
and
exit
those and all that
criteria,
kind of stuff.
there's
but
typically like
I think it helps you get a pulse of what
for a
to
lot of
say.
companies that don't
And
have
I'm always
that
talking to
dialed,
my product
it's,
marketing
oh,
team.
we lose a lot of deals
What
in
are people saying?
negotiations, so we
That's
do a
the
bunch of
language we need to
negotiation
use. So I
training.
find it such
But
a
was that really
shortcut
the reason
to
we're
say
losing
the right
these
things
deals, or
across
did we
our
miss
go-to-market
something
journey?
along the way?
How
Did
we
we
need to
not
be
develop
filling
the
the gaps for our
discovery
existing
so that we're
customers,
not
or
pitching
just
value?
being
Do we
around
not
and
get to the
talking
right
to practitioners
stakeholders
during
during
maybe a
don't get a
POC,
booth like
so it just
participate in
ends
the
up dying there,
conversation,
but we didn't do the right
what are the
stuff. How do you
speakers
think
saying?
about
What are the
maybe
the
the
folks that are
signals
leading
data
might be saying, hey,
the
we're doing a
actual
really bad
space,
job of
saying
negotiation,
not just the
stage
gardeners
5, but
and
the
horses
real
in the world. No
problem
offense.
is what are the practitioners
early
saying? That's
stage
what we need to be
disco
I
saying,
agree
or
with you. I
during
think
the
if you're going to
POC
sell to a
process.
revenue
That's
operator,
a great
you need
call.
to speak
So
like a
I
revenue
think it's a
operator.
balancing
You
of two
need to
different things, and it
understand
could
what
be
their
both.
problems
But
are and what
what
they're
I
trying
would
to
say
solve.
you're
So-
referring to more
Not
is
about
around
no bullshit
pipeline
they
health
are, and
quality
selling to
issues,
salespeople.
which goes back to discovery.
They are very
So
direct. This is not selling
if
to
you don't
HR
have a
folks.
high level of
This is
entry
not
or
selling to-
criteria
Not
for
direct,
qualification in the
not
Recruiters.
discovery
This is
process,
selling to very
he's going to have
direct
an
people.
inflated pipeline, and
If
then
you
it's really
say the
hard to
wrong
uncover
few
what's
words and
going
don't
along
understand
with
what's
the sales
on the
process.
ground, you're never going
That's
to be able
where,
to get a
you
deal
know,
done.
methodologies,
I agree.
whether
Well,
you use
I'm excited to be
Sandler and
here.
Medpic, a
Thanks for
combination
letting
of
me
both,
take over
whatever
your
it is.
interview.
Okay, well,
making
last
sure that
question
you're
I'll
capturing
ask
all
for
the
you.
required
All right.
information,
I'll
you're
give you
using
one.
tools,
Okay, I'll give you one.
whatever conversation intelligence tool that you use
So
to make
yes,
sure
we
that you
talked
use
about the power
scorecards.
of RevOps.
You got to check the box on the
At the
quality
end of the day,
front
they make the things
before you
happen.
understand what's going wrong
How
with
do
the
you think
actual
about
qualified
aligning the
pipeline that you're
strong
moving through the
personalities
process.
across
So
sales
a lot of
leadership,
times
across CS
issue
leadership,
starts
across
at the
marketing?
very beginning?
How do you get
It's very
everyone to
common.
row
Yeah.
in the right direction when they all have
second
so many
question,
needs and asks and
When
requirements?
you think about
and
being a
you only
RevOps
have a
leader, right?
limited
You
number of
oversee,
resources to
like
execute
it's very
against.
broad
Yeah,
scope, especially
great
moving from like
question.
the
There
old
are a
world
lot
of just
of
sales ops to
personalities in the
CS ops to marketing
go-to-market.
ops
I
to
think it's
kind of
truly
the
just
whole revenue
aligning
function.
everyone
How do you think
around
about
the most strategic
balancing
goals,
your
the shared
resources
KPIs.
and
What are we
priorities
trying to do
with the strong
to drive the
personalities of
company
leadership
forward?
across those
And if we're all
customer-facing teams?
focused on this, moving the needle
Yeah,
in
so
the
it's
same direction,
kind of
on
indirectly
the same
talking about
metric,
how
on
we
the
tie
same
all those
KPI,
functions together.
then it's easy to align
Yeah, how you
everyone
decide,
on
hey,
that
what's the
shared
thing that's
goal,
getting
because
done? Maybe sales
ultimately,
cares
we
more
all
about
want the
this,
same
but
thing,
it's a
which
big
is that
marketing
our
challenge,
businesses are
or
wildly
hey, we really got to
successful.
focus on
And
post-sales, so sorry,
getting
sales and
everyone
marketing, you're not
really
going to get what you want.
focused.
How do you think
that?
about managing?
That's a great
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
Well, first
So-
you have to set them.
stakeholders.
It goes into
You have to go down from 20 to
prioritization,
5
obviously,
or
but to take a
5 to
step back,
3
we're
and
in the
making
process
sure
of,
that you have those aligned
implementing or
KPIs
operationalizing the
that
bow
then
tie
align back
model.
to the
So
goals of the different
winning by design,
organizations.
yeah, yeah.
winning
And
by
then if you
design,
have that
famous
North
bow
Star
tie
that you're
model,
all
but
rowing towards,
obviously when you zoom out,
then
there's
it's much
you know
easier
you don't
to
fit all the
get that
stages or all the
alignment
steps
across
in the process
priorities
within that
and
bow
goals
tie.
and making sure
But when
that
you
we're all
double click
working
in,
towards that.
you know, we
that
could actually
common,
probably have 72
that
different
common
touches from the
deliverable.
time
Okay, so
it's
I
a
have
marketing
few things. I love that
qualified
'cause
lead
you
all the way
said
through to when we're
strategy,
upselling
and to
and
me,
renewal.
my favorite
Yeah.
maybe
So
business
understanding
quote
exactly
definition
what's
is
going on in
the
each of
definition of
those
strategy
different
is what not
steps
to do.
where
So
we're
it sounds
falling
like
short,
that's
where
really the
there's
key
areas
is how
for
do we get
improvement.
as few
And then
things
just
as
once again
possible to
using
row
the
in the
data
same
to
direction.
drive
At
where
the
we're
end of the
spending
day,
our
it's
time,
prioritization,
prioritizing
and
things.
priorities need to be based on the
Getting
goals, and
leadership
the goals
involved,
need
and
to
a
be
big
based
part
on
of
the
that is making sure
KPIs
that
we need to
RevOps has a
impact.
seat at the
So,
table
Awesome.
to make sure
Cool.
that we can talk
thanks for
through,
having
hey,
me.
this is what we think the impact is
That's
of this
right.
problem at the
That's
beginning
right.
of the funnel.
I did take over this interview.
This might be more
Well,
important
thanks
down here
all for joining
post-booking,
Accord
and just
and
really
Tessa
aligning as a
Whittaker
group
at the
collectively as
RevOpsAF
leadership,
conference.
a leadership team, being able to zoom out